newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime and gore. Ting-a-ling-ling, city desk, pull the press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press.
The Media Project gives you a half hour of commentary and analysis talking about what's going on in the journalism landscape. I'm Rex Smith, your host, formerly editor of the Times-Union, now at The Upstate American here, and I'm here with my colleagues of our current panel of media projectors, you could call them. Judy Patrick is here, Miles Reed, Ira Fussfeld. Let's see, what are we going to talk about? Judy Patrick, former editor of the Daily Gazette. What's on your mind today?
You know, I'm hoping we can touch a little bit today with the Pulitzers being announced, the value of prizes and whether or not our industry gives itself too many prizes. You know, what's the value? Where do we go with those?
Backpatting by journalists. All right, it's a good thought. Miles Reed, editor of the Daily Gazette. What's on your mind?
I was thinking about talking today about the legal system, about how the media, especially local media, covers the legal system, whether it's criminal, whether it's the civil courts. It affects so much. And sometimes we get criticized that we cover the legal system too much, but it is a huge part of politics and business and life for a lot of people. So I think it's really critical, especially within, the perspective of what's happening at the national level with the Trump administration criticism of the judiciary.
Yeah, very relevant today when you see the legal system under attack by the White House. Ira Fussfeld, publisher emeritus of the Kingston Daily Freeman and affiliated publications. What are you thinking?
Well, I've been watching a lot of TV, more than I should admit, but I'm struck again, as I have been during both Trump administrations, about whether or not reporters who cover Trump in the White House have an obligation to start calling him on some of the claims he makes, such as fake news and et cetera. And for a reporter to say, excuse me, sir, we're not fake news. We take what we do seriously, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm curious to see, the three of you we have one active and two retired editors. It's been much too long since I was an editor, so I'd like to hear what you think you would say to your reporters if you were sending them out to the White House. Would you expect them to call Trump on things like that?
All right, we'll have to think about that a little bit. We'll give us a little bit of time to think on that while we talk about a couple other things. Yeah, I wanted to talk about horse racing. Not really. Well, yes, in a way. Last week I was in a room full of journalists during the running of the Kentucky Derby, and so naturally we were all rooting for journalism.
Did you have any money down on journalism?
No, I didn't. Good thing I didn't, right? Horse went off with, I think, 7-2 odds and faded in the stretch, and unfortunately was run down by a horse named Sovereignty.
I made money on Sovereignty.
Did you?
Yes, I bet $5 to place on. He, lo and behold, finished second.
I bet against journalism.
Actually, I bet on a horse named Rodriguez that got scratched, so that I didn't lose anything there.
Well, I don't want to make too much of the metaphor because a lot of people have already done that, including Pete Hegseth and the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller. And we know how this administration feels about journalism with a small j, us. It hates truth-telling, and I'd say there's nothing more complex than that. It is not a matter of a conservative view of journalism versus a liberal view, which is what Donald Trump claims. We know that because he hates the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board after they said that his tariffs are the dumbest trade war in history. And last year, when the New York Post was trying to distort its news coverage to elevate Ron DeSantis as opposed to Trump flipped out on Rupert Murdoch. So it's not conservative versus liberal. We're in a contest between truth and propaganda. And I want to get into this with us here because just look at the latest news about Voice of America. For 83 years, Voice of America has been presenting straightforward news to the world in the American tradition. But now, after laying off 1,300 people who worked there, this week the administration announced that Voice of America is now going to carry a feed from One America News, OAN, the right-wing propaganda network. There's nothing else to call it. And that, in fact, violates federal law. This gets to your point, Miles, about the courts being so powerful, because in the words of the statute, Voice of America is supposed to have accurate, objective, and comprehensive reporting. So this is going to get worked out in the courts as much of what's going on in Washington now will. Anyway, the first leg of the Triple Crown is where this all began, and a horse named journalism didn't win. But here's what I want to say. The campaign annually of thoroughbreds is short. It's a short season. But I've got to hope and believe, I wouldn't be here if not, that the fight for truth-telling is a long one. And I have to believe that in the end, journalism will triumph. So that's what I'm banking on anyway. I don't know. This business with OAN taking over VOA, it's terrifying.
It was. And when I first saw this story, I thought we were all worried that Voice of America would go silent and there would be no news. Well, you know what? I would think I would prefer silence to the OAN feed going into the Voice of America distributions. I mean, any of you, if you're not familiar with OAN, just go, they have a website and you can see for yourself what kind of far right-wing propaganda they disseminate. That is not doing what the original legislation called for. Carrie Lake, who's been in charge of this, the Trump administration is trying to, skirt the judicial orders by providing this kind of content. OAN says it's not going to make any money on it, but they are going to increase their footprint. They are going to increase their influence. And this is just the opposite of what should be happening.
Well, you consider that the D.C. Circuit Court, which is the next level below the Supreme Court, has now affirmed that Trump has to rehire all those people. So they're going to get paid again, all these people, 1,300 who worked for the international arm of American journalism. But you still have to wonder, there will still be a way that the administration will disable these entities.
Well, help me out here, because you're a lot more optimistic regarding the future of journalism than I am, but I'm willing to be convinced that optimism is warranted. But the weeds of distrust and flat out not believing what it is we do have been planted and have grabbed hold to the extent that I don't know how we get out of it. What do we see that leads us to be optimistic about the future of journalism when there's just so many places for people to get their news and commentary where people don't always make the distinction between news and commentary, where people are growing up distrusting us or not believing us? How can we be optimistic?
Well, I think there's a difference between the brands that we have represented, the kinds of journalistic enterprises that we've worked for, and what the future may hold. I really think that as journalists learn to take advantage of the platforms that exist now, as we learn to deliver journalism on Instagram, and as this gets to be imbued into the technique of young rising journalists, we're going to be better at delivering real news, I think. Not we, we're too old for this, but I think probably even young journalists you hire, I would bet, Miles, are probably more adept at this than the the folks who are in the generation between even mine and yours.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of promising signs, in the younger generation of journalists. I am hopeful. One area where I see a lot of optimism, or at least hope, is I think where we're going to go is more specialized niche journalism. And the reason being is that I think the market will support this. One of our former reporters at the Gazette, great business reporter, John Cropley, who Judy and I worked with for a long time, he left our business, the Gazette, but he went to a very specialist publication that deals with the power industry. And it's a massive industry, right? This is the grid. It affects corporations, it affects all the big utilities, it affects homeowners who need power, etc. So I think that kind of reporting is where there's an opportunity to continue to thrive. We all know that businesses thrive on information. A lot of shipping companies thrive on political information. They thrive on updated weather. So I think there's going to be a shift in this. We're a smaller example of this, I think, at a local newspaper group. But we know that there are businesses that find our information vital to conduct their business, whether they're bankers or business owners, et cetera. So we're really focusing on that kind of coverage. And we hear this. We hear it from, local Chamber of Commerce people, small business owners saying, I read the Gazette every day because I need to know. I want to find out where there's a development going on. I want to find out if there's a new employer coming to town, because then, knowledge is power. And so I am hopeful that is the direction we're going to go.
The entity you talk about that is specialized, I think it's very interesting. You look at education, for example. Chalkbeat is a nonprofit nationally, and there are now a couple of other entities that are a part of this organization. Chalkbeat covers education, power generation is another one, and what are some of the other industries that are coming along where you can actually get specialized coverage that I think people will trust?
Well, right here in New York State, there's a group called State Watch, and all they do is they sell subscription to politicians, and they do much deeper, closer scrutiny of and bills in the legislature. And one of our former colleagues worked there, I think before he was with us or after, and it was a great training ground to learn how to cover the government. And Rex, you're on the Adirondack Explorer board, which is a fabulous publication. I'm a huge fan. I know Judy is too. Great job. I read that partly because I'm a hiker, canoeer, bicyclist, but also to know about land use issues. They had one of your former guys, Jim Odato, who was their editor up until very recently, who knows land use issues and Adirondack legal issues better than anybody. That coverage is vital to anybody that either owns a home up there or wants to build a business up there or hike there or is interested in the environment. So I think that's the direction.
And what I was trying to remember that I couldn't along the line with Chalkbeat is that the same organization created in 2020 VoteBeat, which focuses on local election rules. And then last year they added something called HealthBeat. So I think more and more, when you said power generation, I think that's their next target. I think they're going to be adding, and these specialized bits of coverage, and I'm on the board of New York Focus, which does investigative reporting on state government and politics, which is another.
Yeah. Right in our area, also the Business Review just does a great job, have a lot of subscribers, and I think the vast majority will be business owners, bankers, etc. And I know a lot of my friends who are business leaders, they wouldn't go a day without reading the Biz Review.
Now, to the point that Judy made a minute ago, a lot of these organizations are now actually winning prizes. The Marshall Project, which focuses on prisons and the justice system, won a Pulitzer Prize. So they have that kind of specialization. You're not a great fan of prizes.
I'm not a great fan. ProPublica won a Pulitzer Prize this week for some of its work. I mean, when you write a story, you shouldn't be writing a story to win a prize, and I think too often that happens. And we should be writing stories, covering stories, broadcasting news that our readers care about. And sometimes those stories aren't going to be fancy or sexy or be something that will grab the attention of a judge at a big contest. I think prizes are good for the morale of the reporters and the editors and the news organizations. It increases our profile. It provides a foundation for us to build our credibility. I see all of that. But I also see too often people writing stories not so much for their audience, but for a judge and the contest.
Even today, in the era of fewer people to do the work. In other words, I couldn't imagine my former newspaper being terribly concerned about writing to win awards because they're barely able to keep up with the day-to-day minutia of what they're covering.
But ambitious reporters are, and I love ambitious reporters, but I don't want them to look away from covering the city council story that needs to be covered tonight because they're working on an investigative piece that they think is going to win an award.
But to Ira's point, the legacy news organizations that have been depleted have really faded from competition for these prizes even. There was only, among the Pulitzers this year that were awarded a few days ago, for-profit metro newspapers, only one of them won. The Houston Chronicle won a Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. Otherwise, what used to be the entities that would win everything did not. It's quite amazing. Now, there were Pulitzers won by the big national organizations, by the New York Times. But other than that, a lot of it goes to the not-for-profits.
You used to be a judge. Am I right about that?
I was a juror, yeah.
How aware of the source of the stories that you were judging were you, and how much did that guide your decision? In other words, did you take the New York Times entry more seriously than you may have taken a smaller paper from somewhere else on the West Coast?
Well, I'll tell you, I think when it came down to it, what the jurors do is they come up with 3 finalists in every category, and then they submit it to the Pulitzer Prize board, which is chosen by the trustees of Columbia University. And so that is the entity that makes the final award. But in deciding who the finalists would be, there was a moment in like one year, I recall, when we were torn between who's going to be the 3rd finalist. Would it be the Hartford Courant about nurses who kill, as I recall, or the Chicago Tribune about doctors who kill? We went for the smaller paper. We went for the Hartford Courant because we said, well, it's harder for a regional paper than it is for a major metro. That may not be such a good thing, and I probably shouldn't even divulge this, but it was now 20-some years ago, so it's probably okay.
We'll win an award for exposing it.
There we go.
I think the awards ceremony at the Pulitzer, and also every year in New York State, the New York Press Association, we used to have the Associated Press Awards. We don't have that anymore. I think they are actually a stark illustration of this huge divide in the media, the entities that can attract the really good talent, because the talent pool is shrinking, unfortunately. Not as many people are willing to do journalism jobs. So the talent pool is shrinking. The award ceremonies, especially at the state level, used to be very much, there was a lot of parity. There were award winners all over the state, and they had different categories. Now there are a few sort of haves versus have-nots who are able to dominate in them, and it's just what it is. It doesn't mean that they are not deserving of those awards, because they do some great work, but one example is 4 of the Gazette's really good journalists just over the last year were hired away by the Times Union, and the Times Union's smart about that. Your successor, Casey Seiler, is a great journalist, hires really good people. He every year is able to win the top paper in New York State, deservedly, but we win fewer awards, and they're able to win more just because of this division. And it's not sour grapes on my part, because they have some excellent people, but it's harder and harder for the smaller papers, smaller chains to hang on to talent.
You know, the Pulitzer for local reporting was won by a nonprofit, the Baltimore Banner, but it did so in conjunction with the New York Times.
Yes.
It didn't win on its own. It was part of a fellowship program, I understand. I always love to watch the local reporting awards because it serves as a reminder of all the good work that's being done in the country. And again, as much as I cringe when I see the prizes coming out, I love looking at the stories themselves. I always click on the links to go back and say, oh yeah, that was a great story. And we are doing really great work as an industry. So maybe I take back some of the bad things I say about awards, but I do think we pat ourselves on the back a little bit too much.
Yeah, I think that's true. And by the way, if you think the Times Union hires away the Gazette people, people hire away from the Times Union.
I neglected to say that, and I was thinking because I'm aware of that, and those people go on to great things. And that is the cycle that, again, that's the Washington Post and the New York Times poaching from them and the smaller talent pool.
That's why I didn't stay at the Rapid City Journal.
I worked with an editor in Kingston, and he always said the reporters sitting around the newsroom in the Washington Post are not saying to themselves, boy, I hope I can get a job in Kingston someday.
Well, we ought to talk about what those reporters are talking about in Washington. I'm interested, Ira, in your comment at the very beginning that you're upset about reporters not standing up to the president during press conferences.
Yeah, I think we've evolved since the last Trump administration in the sense that our news stories now are more likely to say when he's lying, or they're certainly more eager to fact check than they used to be. But it bothers me when I see reporters interview Trump either in a large gathering or on one-on-ones, such as he had recently with both ABC and NBC. When he makes a comment that's derogatory about us in the press, is it appropriate for the reporter to, rather than just nod, to say, well, excuse me, Mr. President, we're not the fake news. Here's what we do on a day-to-day basis. We're not making this stuff up out of whole cloth. Or do we let him just go off and leave these things unattended? I'm of the belief now that that they should intervene. It might, if it embarrasses him, it might mean you'll never see him again. You'll never be invited to another press gathering again. But is it worth it? Why do we let his negative comments linger?
Isn't it sort of a piece of not disputing factual misstatements, too. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi from Florida, claimed in a press conference that they'd seized 22.2 million fentanyl pills, and she said that has saved over 119 million lives. Well, that would be 1/3 of the U.S. population, she's claiming. And then one of her spokesmen even doubled down on it and told Slate that 258 million lives had been saved. This is preposterous. And shouldn't reporters, when that is being said, stand up and say, I beg your pardon, General Bondi?
And they do it sometimes. In that ABC interview, Terry Moran called Trump up on the Photoshop picture of the alleged terrorist who was deported, and he pressed Trump on it, and Trump saw he was caught, and he moved on. But it is done. I just wish it was done more
Trump
often.
didn't want to move on. He goes, "You want me to go get the photo? I'll show you the photo." That was a very painful interview for me to watch as an editor, because the press has historically given great deference to the president of the United States, and justifiably so. He's been elected president. Mr. President, please excuse me again and again, and try to be super, super, super polite. I think maybe the super politeness they need to back off on that a little bit and say, hey, this is what the real situation is. But I think we all have encountered that with any person. We're civil people. Reporters are polite.
Yeah, and it's one thing, I agree with Ira about this. I think in an ideal situation, we would band together and stand up. The flip side of this is that, I coach younger reporters to, as much as possible, to maintain their control. Don't be reactive when they're in a tight situation. Because the reality is that every time our reporters are out in any of our areas, they have people telling them they're fake news, or you're getting it wrong, your paper stinks, etc. I always try to guide them, to question things or to push back a little bit, but don't get too distracted, because I think there's something about it that I think some of these politicians want to get the journalists on their back heels. And it happened actually here in Albany a lot. You all remember Andrew Cuomo was vicious with a few reporters, a New York Times reporter who did some really excellent work. And Cuomo went after him viciously one time, and this reporter's work contributed to sort of revealing some of these allegations against Cuomo. Cuomo was also very vicious with Karen DeWitt for public radio. So I'm not making excuses for it, Ira, but I think just to be cautious about it, because I think there's part of the Trump shtick, or Hegseth or Bondi, they want to start a fight. That is going to be clickbait. That is going to be to their benefit if they can get into a screaming match or some kind of an argument, because then the whole that side is going to say, see, this is the example. They're trying to get us.
Yeah, but if we don't get into a fight with them, our silence is viewed by some as an acquiescence to the allegation.
Yeah, that's a concern, absolutely.
By the way, speaking of holding politicians' feet to the fire, the Museum of Political Corruption, a nonprofit here in Albany, has announced that it's going to give the annual Nellie Bly Award for investigative reporting to Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post. He's the guy who does the fact-checker column in the Washington Post. So that's a real cool thing. Watch for the event where that's going to be given away. The prize for that is $1,250, because that is the amount that Nellie Bly was told in, what was the year, in 1910 or something, was the amount that it would take to bribe the entire New York State legislature. So Dr. Bruce Roeder, who heads the Museum of Political Corruption, always hands $1,250 under a table to the winner.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Fact-checking is a tough job, and the people who do it come under constant attack. I mean, and they're very good at what they do. There are a number of fact-checkers out there, fact-checking websites, and, man, I still encourage everybody I know, before you post something or repost something on social media, make sure that it's real. I'm seeing more and more from both the left and the right of things that are just not right. And you as a poster have a responsibility to make sure it's true before you post it.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Okay, one more topic we got to get to. Miles, you wanted to talk about lawsuits and how we use them as journalists for good and ill.
Yeah, so I mean, it dawned on me over the last couple of weeks when there's been this really concerted effort on the part of the Trump administration to try to discredit the judiciary. And it dawned on me that in our area, and certainly in the Gazette's coverage, but also the Times Union and the Kingston papers and WAMC, a lot of our coverage does revolve around the judicial system. whether we're covering a political candidate challenging a rival's petitions, they go to court. That's what they do. They file a court. If it's a business leader who's facing financial problems, they go to a federal bankruptcy court potentially and seek protection. The reason I bring this up is that there is this narrative going on that somehow the judiciary is woke or they're off the hinge leftist. And I think a lot of our readers, and I hear those kind of criticisms from letter writers, callers, but a big part of our judicial system is elected. And it's not just all woke left Democrats. In our area especially, once you leave the cities, most village justices, town justices, Supreme Court justices are most likely Republicans, and they are political animals. But I bring this up because I think, by and large, our judicial system, there is fairness, and there's a lot of checks and balances. And more than anything, maybe this is my civics sort of reminder, is that, we write about these cases all the time, about appeals, et cetera. But I would say, by and large, the system has worked so far. And in fact, the party that now is criticizing the judicial system has relied on it for all kinds of things. The Trump administration, he as his business and personally has hired plenty of lawyers for bankruptcy filings, for dealing with his criminal cases. So again, this is not me attacking him politically, but I think we're losing focus about the value and the objectivity of the judicial system. Not to say that some judges don't have inherent biases, but I think we're pretty well served by it.
Well, hey, if you're a reporter, the best thing you can hope for is that somebody will file suit, because it gives you access as a reporter to the documents they use to make their case, which is a great thing. We're out of time, so that's a pretty interesting media project. Thank you, folks. Judy Patrick, Miles Reed, Ira Fussfeld, and I'm Rex Smith. We are grateful to David Gastina, our producer, for making this all happen, and to you folks for joining us here. Hope to see you again next week on The Media Project.
Such interesting people, when they know they've got a people's fight to wage. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, newspaper guild, got a free new world to build. Meet the people, that's a thrill, all together fits the bill.
The Media Project is a national production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. This week's projectors include former Times Union editor and current Upstate American Substack columnist Rex Smith, Judy Patrick, former editor of the Daily Gazette, editor and vice president of the Daily Gazette, Miles Reed, and Daily Freeman publisher emeritus Ira Fussfeld. You can listen to The Media Project anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm your producer, David Gastina. Thanks for listening.
Readers and to big shots for their dough. Now publishers are such interesting people. It could be prostitution, I don't know. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, circulation, ting-a-ling-a-ling, advertising, get those readers, get that payoff. What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.